Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of KickSaga. This is the series where we talk to first-time board game creators about taking their projects to Kickstarter, and typically we'll interview them once before and once after their project is complete. Today, however, we're doing a little bit of a different type of episode today. We're going to be talking to a designer who was gearing up to launch their game on Kickstarter, and we actually scheduled a interview in the typical KickSaga manner, where I was going to interview him before his product launched on Kickstarter and then interview him afterwards. But in the lead up to the Kickstarter, some things occurred, and the Kickstarter isn't going to happen now. And so I thought both he and I thought it would be an interesting opportunity to kind of discuss what can happen when you have a game signed with a company and you're ready to launch it on Kickstarter, and then the unexpected happens, and you have to kind of adjust course and do something else. So we're going to dig into all of that today with Joe Paull, who is the designer of an awesome card game called Prestige. Thanks for being here, Joe. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing quite well. I hope this is an interesting conversation in the very least, and hopefully people can get something out of it. So.
Yeah, something I love about this series is that even though I'm talking to board game creators who are going to Kickstarter, and you would assume that it's kind of all the same thing, right? You create a board game, you take it to Kickstarter, you do all X, Y, and Z, you launch it, it's successful, and then you send it off to the backers. But every interview, I'm finding different little nuances, different unexpected things, different twists and turns that creators can stumble upon or find themselves in. And then it's always interesting to hear how they adjust course and the lessons they learned from those setbacks, roadblocks, or opportunities, depending on how you look at it. And so, like I said, we were gearing up to do an interview with you right before you were about to launch Prestige on Kickstarter, and then that didn't happen. And so we're going to dig into what happened and why that happened, and kind of how you managed your way through all of that. But before we get to, that's kind of a teaser. Before we get to all of that, I'd love to just learn a little bit about you and your journey into board game design.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not a professional board game designer, as in it's my full-time job. It's a hobby of mine that I have been lucky enough to be thrown into the world of actually making these dreams become a reality. And I'm still planning on doing that, even despite the occurrences that we'll dive into later.
Sure.
But in the day-to-day, I work in the field of traffic engineering. And I'm a big board gamer, but I wasn't actually into board games as much until I came out into the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I live now. And given the way that the Bay Area works, you have to have a roommate. It's just way too expensive out here for anybody. So I ended up having this roommate who had like 200 to 300 board games when I moved in. And that just kind of blew my mind, because I thought board games were like Monopoly and Trouble and Life. And then it just kind of blew me away, the variety of not just themes, but mechanics and all of that fun stuff. Cool. And yeah, I just kind of spent a year with him and his family, playing like 2 to 3 board games a week. And it was always a different game. And it just kind of opened up my mind to the possibilities of what you can do with some cardboard and some paper and some dice.
Totally. What was your kind of your gateway game, or the game that kind of opened up the world for you?
The very first one that I played with them was called Last Night on Earth, which is a really fun zombie survival game. It's really campy. It's meant to like reflect the old school zombie horror films. It was a lot of fun. But I think the one that really blew my mind and made me want to come back to board games over and over again was a game called Above and Below. It's still my favorite game of all time. It's the one that I've probably played the most often, with the exception of my own games. And it still offers something new every time I crack it open.
Nice. Yeah, that's a cool one that is a good kind of mix of Euro mechanics and
Mhm.
storytelling, and kind of the American style and the European style all mixed into a really cool, tight package. That's a favorite of mine as well.
Yeah.
So let's
Love
talk
it.
about Prestige. Where did you come up with the idea, and what is the game?
Yeah, so Prestige is a city building game. It's set at the dawn of civilization. And the idea is there have been these tribes that were nomadic that have come together and they want to build a great city where all of their people can prosper. And each player represents a different tribe. So there are all these factions in the city working together to build a shared tableau through the different cards that you can play. And you're working together to ensure that the city doesn't fail. It's not like abandoned, destroyed, forgotten to time, anything like that. But at the same time, if you succeed and create a great city that's remembered throughout the ages, only one of you will be remembered as the founder. So you're competing with each other at the same time. So it's a semi-co-op game, meaning that either everybody loses or only one person wins. So it's got
Right.
a fun little balance that you have to strike with how much do you want to help each other and how much do you want to look out for your own back.
Yeah, and I've played it. I've play tested it a couple times, and I had a lot of fun with it. I'm fascinated by a couple aspects of it. The shared tableau,
Mm-hmm.
where you're all adding cards to one big sprawling kind of metropolis or whatever it ends up
Yeah.
being, and but then the semi co-op nature of it, where you're trying to manage not all losing together while still keeping your own best interests in mind. And that was a
Mm-hmm.
cool tension when I was playing the game. Was I want to make sure we all don't lose, but I also
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure I win. And how do I balance that and kind of hold some of my cards to my chest as I'm managing that? And that was really a lot of fun. And then third, there is kind of a narrative element to it, as
Mm-hmm.
you reveal some kind of event cards that happen and can sway things one way or the other throughout the game. And
Yeah.
that's always interesting to kind of tell the story and make and immerse you in this world that you're building. So all three of those things really kind of got me hooked in the game, and I've been following it ever since. Um, and yeah, so it's a great game. And
Thanks.
you were, I guess, pitching it, and I guess kind of tell me the process of you deciding whether you wanted to kickstart it yourself or pitch it to a publisher. Did you go back and forth? Did you always have something in mind, and all that?
Yeah, I think this is a interesting game from like its onset because I didn't think it would ever be published. I just kind of built it as a
Mm,
fun little exercise for myself. I could make it like at home and I could show it to friends. But the game actually has 230 unique cards, and as a self-publisher who knows nothing about art and only had seen some quotes from some random people online.
right.
230 pieces of art is a lot of money. And it
Yeah.
just didn't seem feasible that we would be able to get that published. I didn't think, even though publishers themselves have more money than an individual and more resources to get that kind of thing done, it didn't seem feasible that they'd want to invest that much money into a first time designer. So I didn't really have high expectations for it ever becoming something commercialized.
Mm,
But then I actually ran across this company that I had signed with online, and we just started talking. And they asked me to pitch a couple of games to them because they really liked the designs that I had, like showcased on my Instagram.
mm,
And one of them was Prestige. Prestige was the most mechanically set game. The biggest thing was it just needed its art. And they had some connections to artists, and together we were able to actually come up with a strategy for making all of the art in a way that is cheaper because it's less pieces of art, but it's also a really interesting breakdown because what we ended up doing was we have 7 different factions. Kind of, there's one that doesn't belong to anybody, but it has its own set of cards, and each faction has their own cityscape that was painted. And it's these very beautiful watercolor paintings that have all the buildings that each faction can offer in it. And the cards themselves just kind of chop these pieces up, which is something that we did out of a financial necessity, but actually creates a really cool scenario because each card now is like a puzzle of those original cityscapes. And as you play it into the shared tableau, you are starting to reassemble this puzzle in your own way, intermingled with the other factions, which is just a really beautiful comparison to how a real city is born, with a lot of diversity and architectural differences. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool to start with, the city as a complete, huge kind of picture of the city, and then just break it up into the individual cards, and then be able to mix and match. And, hey, maybe there's a little meta game where you're trying to match the city, actually to the other pieces of that city, as you're playing the game. And so that opens up some just cool, fun stuff. And I like that with games where, especially if you like playing with young kids, they can just have fun with trying to match the pieces or whatever, and not even worry about the mechanisms of the game. So that's really cool.
Or adults. I've had some people take the cards and be like, I want to reassemble it.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Kids at heart.
Yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned that this publishing company, you had a relationship with them beforehand, and they were kind of asking you about the games that you had. So how did that come about, and what were you doing for them?
I wasn't really working with them directly. They had followed me on Instagram. I followed them back, and I don't remember who reached out to who first, but a conversation just got started rolling. Something that I had learned later on was that they had only founded their company 2 days before I started talking to them. Or it might have not been 2 days, but it was something really small like that. And that to them was just this is really cool. We already have a designer interested in us publishing. And they had a few designs that they were also publishing themselves. And that's why they started their own company. And so, we just started talking, and eventually just set up a time for me to pitch both Prestige and another game that I was working on called Dust in Space. But Dust in Space is epic space saga that needs a lot of work. So Prestige was the easier one to move forward with. And I signed 2 years ago about, and a lot of that time we spent developing the art, and I had gone to a bunch of events. I went to Gen Con last year to kind of showcase Prestige and get some playtest feedback, which was really cool. Never been to a convention before. And over the course of that time, the game just kind of progressed, and then we were leading up to the Kickstarter.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So what were some of? It sounds like you worked really closely with the company to prep for the Kickstarter and kind of get the marketing going and stuff like that. So kind of talk about, and this is good because we typically don't talk to designers who work with a publishing company. Typically it's self-publishers that we talk to here. So I'm curious too, kind of how that relationship worked, how the roles were divided, and who was in charge of what, and kind of all the decisions that were made leading up to the Kickstarter.
I think I had a somewhat unique experience with a publisher, because they were a very small publisher, and they were open to me still being highly involved in the game, which was great for me and something that they also really appreciated. I think most designers, when they sign over a game, they don't see too much of the internal workings of the publisher, which to some designers is great, because all they want is to see their game be brought to life. They've done their job, and they've signed it off to the next person, handed off the baton. But for me, it was kind of cool to see the internal workings. They allowed me to review each piece of art as it came in. They allowed me to be involved with the Kickstarter decisions. So actually, at the beginning of this year, I had, because I had been so integral into the design, they had offered me a position that came with an equity stake in the company. And so I was their director of game design as of January, which was a real honor. It didn't mean too much, just, it's a title. It wasn't like a paid position, but it was still really cool to be acknowledged in that way and to get even more integrated into the company.
Yeah.
And that could just kind of open up new avenues for me too. I started talking to them with helping them out, reaching out to more local game stores out here, seeing the sales side of things. It was a really interesting experience that allowed me to learn a lot.
Cool. Yeah, I can see how kind of getting with a publisher who is just starting out, like they were,
Hmm.
kind of on the ground floor, that you have that opportunity to maybe be a part of the company or be a part of, a more integral part of that. And they would, want to work more closely with you versus like a more well-established publisher who just sees you as a designer and you're
Hmm.
just, designing a game and that's really all you do. And then they take it from there. What were some of your guys' strategies around marketing the game or getting the word out about the game?
Being such a small publisher, we tried to really lean onto the grassroots strategies, which I think we did really well with, for as well as you could do with grassroots. We held a lot of events ourselves. We, um, yeah, just tried to get the word out as much as we could on our own. We didn't lean too heavily into the online marketing and Instagram ads, Facebook ads, all of those things. Part of it was we just didn't have the resources, and it was kind of untested waters for us. Um, and I think in the end, if I were to do it all again, we'd probably want to lean a little bit more into those and just see what we could do with them. Um, and it's probably something that I will do, because if I'm going to do it all again, one way or another. But
Right.
yeah, I think our biggest strategy, which did really well for community building and creating like a core group of our people, was just, I invited people over. My wife and I really love hosting, and everyone we had over for dinner wanted to see my game, so I always broke it
Nice.
out, and they became really supportive community. And I play tested at least weekly on Discord, and people were really interested through that. And I just kind of kept the Facebook group alive, and we'd go out to breweries and bars and just set up and invite people to play, and that got a lot of traction.
Cool.
So we ended up building a smaller community than what you might see for a bigger game from a bigger publisher, but it was a really tight knit community and a really supportive one.
Yeah, it sounds, like very grassroots. And that's kind of
Mhm.
sometimes that's all you can do when you're first starting out and you don't have a big budget to run, tons of Facebook ads or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's important because that helps kind of spark that word of mouth.
Hmm.
And that tells you your game is great if people, love it and want to keep following it after they play it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right. So you're all set with this awesome game. You've got the art done. You've got the Kickstarter scheduled. You've got the KickSaga episode scheduled. We're all ready to do the interview. And then I see the posts online, and you
Mhm.
kind of gave me a heads up beforehand that you're parting ways with this publisher and that you're going to put the Kickstarter on hold. So, as much as you're comfortable divulging, what happened there, and why did that you come to that decision?
Sure. So yeah, ultimately, about 10 days before we launched to Kickstarter, I got a phone call from the president of the publishing company, who told me that the numbers just couldn't work out. This publisher had a very specific um, approach to games in general, and because of what they believed in for manufacturing purposes, which was to hyper focus on like more localized economies. So they wanted everything to be American made,
Mm,
meaning anywhere in like North America, and wanted their designers and artists and everything to be local, which is really really cool of them. But with the turns of the economy, it just wasn't going to work out that they could produce the game and not take a loss
mm,
with how it was currently set up. The quotes that we were getting back originally at the beginning of this partnership just kind of went up a bit higher, and it just really killed off the margin. So it's not something that
wow.
was like either party had any malice. It was just something where the numbers just couldn't work out. And it was really unfortunate, but I was really grateful for the time that I had with them and the way that my game grew. And I grew as a designer and all the things I got to see. And the fact that they developed my art, which was really great because, as I said, I didn't think that was a feasibility. And the way that we found a way to make it work was just really cool. And it's now an integral part of the game. But yeah, unfortunately, the Kickstarter had to be pushed off, and now the game will be separated from the publisher, and I'll be seeking other routes.
Interesting. So, so you think the publisher is looking for like maybe smaller games to start with, easier to, cheaper to produce locally type games, and yours just didn't
Possibly,
fit the bill?
yeah, or yeah, I don't know too much about the exact what caused our game to be not feasible. They have a few people that they are connected with for manufacturing stateside, and most of the games that they create are smaller box games. These
Right.
manufacturing companies, and so I think for the opportunity for these manufacturers to kind of grow, they just need more economies of scale to really pump themselves up. And then maybe one day it'll be feasible to make a bigger game.
Right.
But at the moment, probably smaller box games, not necessarily party games, but at least lighter
Right.
things that only need a few components is probably
Totally.
the most profitable for them at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I don't blame them because
Yeah.
I'm going through this self-publishing journey as well, and crunching the numbers, it's tough. There's very little margin, and so there's
Mhm.
very little room for error, and that can be
Yeah.
scary for sure, especially for a first-time publisher.
And
So
I signed my publishing agreement like it was 2 years ago, so it was in the middle of pandemic, but I think it was before we had started to see all of the like
mm,
massive impacts that it had to the economy.
yeah,
So
the price increasing kind of took a while to catch up after
yeah,
after the pandemic.
and you never really know what's going to happen when you still have like 2 years of development to happen before you can actually launch your game. So
Yeah, totally.
everything's a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common. Like I hear
Mhm.
stories of folks, getting their game signed, and then either they work on developing it or they just sit on it for a while or whatever happens, and then they just don't end up making it for whatever reason,
Mhm.
and that happens.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool though that they're giving you the rights back to the game, because sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they hold on to the game indefinitely or whatever, and so it's nice that you're able to take that and then kind of pursue other avenues with it. And are
Mhm.
you able to keep all the artwork and stuff like that? How is that working?
We're still negotiating that.
Okay.
The agreement hasn't been finalized yet, but I do hope to
Yeah.
keep all the artwork.
Yep.
They've been very open about like trying to help me make sure that the game can still be publishable, and I think the artwork, the assets are a big part of like moving forward, especially if I want to self-publish.
Yep.
So we are still in negotiations, but that makes it sound like it's like two lawyers sitting down. Whereas it's actually just friends coming together to
Right.
discuss what's fair to
Talking
both
about it.
parties. Yeah.
Totally. Well, that's cool. So you mentioned self-publishing. So are you thinking about going that route now that you might have artwork for it and it's pretty much a finished product now?
That's one of the two routes I'm thinking about. Self-publishing, it's still a lot of work, and it's not really something I had originally wanted to sign up for.
Yeah.
I have a day job, and it's already pretty demanding. And self-publishing, there's a lot even after the Kickstarter happens that isn't something that I really know too well how to do. So it'd be a big learning curve, but a lot of the development has already been done. So for me, it might be the route to go. I'm also considering other publishers. I had a few reach out when they heard the news, and
Oh,
that's
nice.
pretty exciting. That's like very
Yeah.
encouraging that I actually have like a
Yeah.
game that uh, is recognizable enough to be a good game that people are like, oh, I'm gonna sweep that up as soon as I can.
Totally. Yeah. So that's I guess the benefit of having already done kind of the legwork of getting the game out there and talking
Yeah.
about it and pumping it up and marketing it is a lot of people know about it. And of course, some of those people might be publishers.
Mhm.
And I think it would be enticing to have a game that's already, pretty much fully developed with all the artwork and it's basically ready to push the button
Yeah.
to send the Kickstarter as long as they can, build up some marketing for it. So I can see that being very enticing for publishers. So I like that you're keeping your mind open to all those different options.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
cool. What are I know we've talked a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned, but anything else you want to touch on about if you have advice for anybody else who might be watching this show who is either thinking of self-publishing or signing with a publisher, things to look out for, things to keep in mind, things to think about, that type of thing?
Yeah, I think one thing that became really apparent to me, which isn't a reflection of my own experience, but was something that when people heard that it wasn't going to go to Kickstarter, they were like, "Did you in your contract have a like time limit where you get your rights back?" And I did not have that in my contract. Luckily for me, the publishers are good people who aren't just going to sit on my game and like never let me touch it again. They're actually willing to like sign the game back over to me. But like you said, that doesn't always happen. And if I hadn't been with a publisher like I am now, like that I was with, they could have very well taken advantage of that by the fact that I didn't have that in the agreement. So if you're looking at signing with a publisher, I highly recommend making sure that that clause is in the contract, that if they don't publish within a certain number of years, I think it's usually like 5, that you get the rights back and you can do with it whatever you want, because you don't want your baby that you've been creating for years to just be shelved and forgotten about.
Totally. Cool. So if people want to, if people are intrigued and want to follow along with Prestige and see what happens next with it, where can they go?
Yeah, there is the Prestige Discord. There's also, we have a Facebook group. And I also regularly post in the Board Game Hype community on their BGH self-promo Sundays. So keep an eye out for that if you're part of that community. You can get all the updates there as well.
Cool. So I'll put links to all of those in the show notes below this video. Cool. And hey, Joe, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. I know things didn't quite work out how you were hoping, but it looks like you have a bright future ahead for Prestige and maybe some of the other designs you got going on. And I appreciate you sharing your story. So thank you. And Thanks. Hopefully we can have you back when Prestige is going to be launched on Kickstarter.
That'd be great. The first ever of your KickSaga that has 3 episodes.
Yep, there you go. It'll be the first. Absolutely. Looking forward to it, my friend. All right, take care. And thank you guys for watching this episode of KickSaga. If you like these stories, if you are learning something, please subscribe to this channel by clicking the subscribe button and then clicking that notification bell so you get notified when new episodes are posted. And if you have any questions for Joe or I about this episode, you can leave them below in the comment section of this video. And I hope to see you next time on another edition of KickSaga. Bye for now.